All righty. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining Talk on Race, Race to Reconcile. We have a phenomenal male panelist for the first time on Talk on Race. We have Pastor Henry, we have Pastor Dan, Pastor Jason, Pastor Armour, and Pastor Eric joining us this morning as we discuss a race to reconcile. So I would love for each person to introduce themselves, introduce the church that you pastor, and then we'll move forward with the conversation. So we'll start with Pastor Henry.
Good morning. I'm sorry, it's good afternoon now. Actually, I am Terry Henry. I am the senior pastor of Macedonia Missionary Baptist Church here in Wilmington, where I've served for the last 33 years. My mission is to serve God's people.
Thank you so much. And Pastor Dan.
Hi, Dan Lewis from First Presbyterian here in Wilmington. I've been here about 4 years this summer, and we love it here and think this is a wonderful community. Got to know some of these folks here on the call and consider myself really lucky to be a part of this community and this conversation today.
Yeah. And Pastor Eric.
My name is Eric Porterfield. I was formerly pastor at Winter Park Baptist in Wilmington from 2007 to 2016 and had the privilege and honor of partnering with Pastor Henry and doing work with our two churches. And now I, along with my wife, we're on staff here as pastors at Fifth Avenue Baptist Church in Huntington, West Virginia.
Thank you so much. And Pastor Armour.
Good evening, Jermaine Armour, pastor of the St. Luke Church here in the great city of Wilmington. Excited to be a part of this conversation with such good friends that I have good relationships, and some I'm just meeting. Our mission at the church is to help revive people as much as we can, help individuals rethink lives and ministries, their connection with the community. And then our biggest component of our mission, I believe, is reforming families. We know that once the family is strong, the church will be stronger, our communities will be better. So that is our mission. Been here 8 years this year.
8 years. All right. And last but not least, our driver, Pastor Jason.
¿Qué tal? Good day. Good to see y'all. I'm Jason Villegas, and I bring you greetings from the northeastern corner of the state, the thriving metropolis of Murfreesboro. And I serve Murfreesboro United Methodist Church and also work in a few regional work areas within the United Methodist Church. And I'm so excited and blessed to be in conversation with y'all.
Yes, we're so happy to have all of you here. And before we begin, I need to do the land acknowledgement statement. So the Lower Cape Fear YWCA serves the people located within the Lower Cape Fear region. This land once thrived with life from indigenous peoples, known today as the Cape Fear Indians and the Waccamaw-Siouan Indian people, living in established settlements along the Cape Fear River and Lake Waccamaw, along with many other established sites in the region. We need to protect and honor the history of these places. Indigenous people are not relics of the past. They are still continuing to demonstrate their talents and gifts amidst the backdrop of ongoing colonialism and oppression. They are worth celebrating. We hope our land acknowledgement statement will inspire others to stand with us in solidarity with Native nations. So to begin, what role do you feel empathy plays when discussing race and reconciliation? Do you feel like you have to be empathetic, or is it compassion? Especially maybe when you don't understand the different sides of people. And maybe before I go into the question, I can also give our audience kind of like a backdrop of where and why we're having this conversation on race and reconciliation. in our community, churches tend to be a really big pillar on congregations. It's a pillar on bringing people together. It's also in the South known as one of the most segregated hours. You have Black churches, white churches, Latino churches. Now we have multiracial, multi-ethnic churches. And I felt like it was an important conversation to have with Talk on Race, to talk about ways in which pastors and leaders and advocates, the mistakes that you make when doing this work, because a lot of times when I'm doing diversity facilitations and when we're working in churches, one of the things that people always say to me is, I'm nervous. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I want to always say the right thing. And as you all know, when you're doing missionary work, when you're doing missions work, someone's always going to do something. Like something always happens, right? So I felt like this panel was important to our community, because as we're moving forward, we need to know that there's always grace in mistakes, that people are going to make mistakes, but there are leaders in the community that have made mistakes and can help you walk through how to bounce back. And I think that's how I get to empathy when you're having conversations around diversity, when you are doing racial reconciliation work. There has to be a level of empathy that you have for other people, not just yourself, right? But for other people when having these conversations. So, I'm posing it to y'all, when you're having these conversations, how does empathy play in carrying out the discussions?
Empathy plays a very important part in discussing race and reconciliation, because empathy, as defined as, you've got to understand how to put yourself in the place of another person. And in doing that, you've got to try to understand how that other person feels, how that other person has been made to feel at some time or another. And then in doing that, we have to acknowledge the fact that I may not be able to actually identify with everything that you have gone through, everything you're going through, but I think that individual wants to know, look, do you care? And so if you can project to them that you care, you may disagree with what they are saying, but to empathize with them and show them. My wife shares something with me that I like, and she says that we have to be able to hear and understand each other's perception. And that to me is very important. So yes, empathy plays a vital role in healing racial issues.
Go ahead.
I was to say, and Pastor Henry, I think in terms of the relationship that our churches have had over the years, education of a predominantly white congregation is often essential to leading to empathy. I remember one Sunday, and this was beautiful. You surprised us. I don't know if you remember. You sent a busload of members of Macedonia to Sunday school at Winter Park. No announcement. No, we didn't. It was just beautiful. And what I carry from that experience was, and what we did, we just sent different numbers of your members to different small group Sunday school classes. And then I heard from one of those Sunday school classes where it was a white male, my age, who in the course of the conversation, one of the members of Macedonia talked about the struggles of getting a loan at the bank. And that was something that was foreign to the white people from the Winter Park congregation that were in that conversation. And so there was this empathy that developed and a relationship that was strengthened because of the willingness, number one, for you to send everybody over and surprise us. But number two, for that, and I don't know who the member of your church was, but for that person to be vulnerable, to share a struggle, and then the member at Winter Park was then able to have an increased level of empathy simply because someone from Macedonia was willing to share vulnerably.
Pastor Henry, what was your thought about taking a busload of your members to another church? What was your thought behind that?
Well, Eric Porterfield and I were not just two pastors, we were friends and still are friends. I feel like today I can call him about anything, and he'll be my pastor if I need him to be so. But we made an effort to bring the two churches together, and it lasted for years. We would swap pulpits the first Sunday in February of every year. I'm not so sure, Eric, was I the first African American to preach there?
Perhaps, yeah.
Uh, I was always well received. I never felt like I was the visiting Black preacher, never. They welcomed me. We had dialogue after the sermon. We had great conversations, and then it just started. So every year, sometimes we would actually surprise our two congregations. He would show up at Macedonia, and I would show up at Winter Park, and it was just great. It was great, and a lot of our members now still actually have relationships with individuals from their church.
Right.
Can I ask, I'm just curious, how has that relationship continued, or has it since you've moved on, Eric? I mean, have the churches kept that close relationship?
I would say that the members are still pretty close. The new pastor has come, and I've met him, his wife and my wife actually talk periodically, but the new pastor and I are not as close as Eric and I were. Yeah. Not that there's anything wrong. So
Right.
please don't.
Yeah. And I would say that there is just this, God leads us in different ways and at different times, and we're able to make connections in different seasons. And so that was a great season, both for myself and for Pastor Henry, and that it's just a beautiful thing. And then I know Pastor Armour and Pastor Lewis, your predecessor, there was a group of African American and Caucasian clergy that were together once a month. I don't know if that's still going on, but there was a really good season for that, and then I think that kind of faded a little bit. It's just those seasons of the life of a church and the life of clergy. That's how things go, and but God's work of reconciling us continues. Is that pastor group still meeting, or is that?
You know what, Eric, it has kind of reformed where the
Okay,
pastors
good.
are still meeting. And as you and Pastor Henry said, the relationships with the members are still going on between the two churches. So that's great. And then COVID had put everything on pause.
Right.
But we still continue, and actually planning this year to get the congregations together again. We had about maybe 3 fellowships with our congregation, and it was absolutely wonderful. So we want to make sure we keep that repeatable and sustainable.
How
I think
how
during
has
that time,
the Black Lives Matter movement and the racial unrest that we've seen around the country, how have you seen it affect some of these racial reconciliation ministries and meetings? Have people talked about it? Has it come up? Have churches shied away from it? What's kind of happened?
Well, I'll take a stab at that, Janiqua. The fact that that particularly powerful summer happened in the middle of COVID was a real challenge, I think, because I think the drive that we'd want to have to be together, because it's so hard to do these things virtually when you're talking about stuff as difficult as that. And so we were, I think, felt hamstrung in how we could respond. Our congregation undertook 21-day race challenge inspired by a church in Charlotte that we know and connect with a lot. And it was an attempt to do some education for our own members and dive into some of these things and follow up with Zoom calls. And that's one way in which we tried to address what was going on in the world. But I'll be honest, it was hard because we felt so distant from each other. And to connect it to the first thing that you said, if empathy is so crucial, and I think it is, empathy is harder when it's mediated through the screen. And so we wanted to be together in flesh and blood and couldn't do it, and that made it hard. There was some fortuitous providential things that happened, though, as people were gathering down at the courthouse steps during that summer. We had a staff member of ours that was there seemed like, yeah,
Jordan.
right, Jordan,
Jordan
nearly
was
everything.
amazing. So a little story about Jordan. Jordan also, so First Presbyterian Church for an entire year donated food, groceries, cleaning supplies, books, things and activities for the kids for an entire year. We were able to give out over 500 bags from what, May until probably like just a couple of weeks ago. And Jordan was one of the volunteers who I would see, he would come once a month and bring cases of water. And I would say, Jordan, what else are you doing? Like, this is a lot of supplies. And he's like, oh, well, we're also passing out water to those who are protesting down at the Capitol. So yeah, I definitely heard about that, Pastor Dan. And I think, it was really good because people needed the water.
Right. So it was sort of the generosity of the community that wanted to support those people making their voices heard, and they just had more than they could use. So Jordan started bringing some of that stuff over to the church for storage, and a lot of it ended up serving our ministries like Grandparents Network, YWCA, and others. So it was sort of like an overflow. And I'll be really honest with you. I heard this was a couple of weeks ago. Now 6 months after the fact, or however long it was, more than that, almost a year. And I heard sort of through the rumor, through the grapevine, hey, has our church gotten all mixed up in that Black Lives Matter stuff? And I heard we were, working with the protesters all summer and supplying them with stuff. And I said to people, no, it was the other way around. In a sense, they helped us and our ministries, and it flowed in the other direction. And so it's just funny how the rumor mill works in that way. But that was a fortuitous, providential thing for us, because we're located down here close to everything. But I'll tell you, it's not without its controversy, right? These are difficult things.
Yeah. Someone commented and said the ministries of MMBC and WPBC continue to fellowship. So I hope somebody knows what that means. Okay.
Dr. Henry and Eric's churches.
Okay. Yes.
Let's go back for a minute to your question about the Black Lives Matter movement. It was a difficult time to pastor during, there's a lot of background noise during that time. And I would say that I had to really calm my own son, our own daughter, down, because we went through that period when we were only trying to draw attention to the fact that Black lives do matter. But then it seemed as though it was overshadowed with individuals coming along saying all lives matter. And I felt like that they were trying to say all lives matter to keep from saying that Black lives matter. All lives do matter. We understand that. But for that period, it appeared to be only Black lives who were being murdered or whatever. So I think a lot of people misunderstood that movement. Now, we know that there were some things that were associated with Black Lives Matter that was not good. We understand that. But from the heart of Christians who were really trying to move forward, we were just trying to say, look, we are humans also. We matter. Don't take our lives for granted. So, I think a lot of good came out of it. And unfortunately, I think that some people with evil intentions, should I say, caused it to go in another direction. And it put a dividing line between a lot of races that should not have been. George Floyd's death was horrific. All of us know that. But it was I'll say the tool that God used to open up conversations and to allow us to reconnect, revisit some old wounds that we thought were healed. And we found out that they were not healed. They were still just as open as they were in days past. That's my take.
Go ahead, Jason.
So I'm pastoring in a rural area, and something that I've learned is that a lot of people derive ideas about Black Lives Matter from what they see on the television, and if that narrative runs contrary to your narrative, there's no way that you're going to undo in a short conversation what somebody has reaffirmed for 20 hours a week watching the news. But something else I think it has been crucially important for me with respect to Black Lives Matter is that it is a moment of revelation situated within the larger moment of revelation that we're experiencing in our moment of racial reckoning in this country. And it is revealing not only the extent to which we are racially broken, the extent to which the ideas of white supremacy have destroyed our imagination, our ability to be the church, but also it's revealing how inept I think we are as the American church as a whole at the theological process of lamentation. Lament, I think, is inextricably tied up with what it means to seek reconciliation. There is no reconciliation without lamenting atrocities that have been committed. And I think it's important to situate, for me, Black Lives Matter as theologically within the neighborhood of lament, but also more broadly to say lament is a muscle that we don't have very well, that we need to practice. So if people aren't willing to talk about Black Lives Matter, I'm like, okay, well, there's certainly a lot that we can lament about. And, most of the Psalms have to deal with lament. A good amount of the prophetic literature is situated with lamentation. Jesus lamented a lot. So it's certainly something that we need to be doing better as we think about race.
So Jason, Jason, you preach right there. I do have something to say though. How do you see the lament process? Maybe the question is, how do you situate lamenting when you're having discussions around reconciliation to bringing people together? Like how can you hold them both together, lamenting and reconciling? How do you see them working?
So I think it begins with telling stories. We talked about empathy. I think empathy is tied up with compassion if it's done well. Compassion is that thing that just tears you up inside, that flips your guts on their head, and you can pretend to be empathetic from a distance, but when you get close to somebody's story, and you start to realize, like, oh dang, there's blood in this soil, and it goes back to the days of settler colonialism, and when you realize that as Resma Menachem talks about in My Grandmother's Hands, that trauma has been passed down from generation to generation. I think hearing people's stories and seeing the ways that our bodies are still reactive towards each other, sometimes against each other, that like, I want to be connected with people, but my body is reacting. My palms are getting sweaty when I see certain people, and I want to be reconciled to them. I think that naturally, when we hear stories, when we realize the depths of the fall caused by America's original sin, that is white supremacy, when we realize the depth of the fall in the story, I think that just naturally unfolds into lamentation, which, if we can sit in that space together, can move us towards hope.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any other reaction to that? That's heavy to think about, the lamenting process. That is super heavy to think about. So if you're thinking about lamenting, reconciling, coming together, how do you help walk people through maybe some of the sweaty palms and the nervousness of reconciling? How do you walk people through when they don't want to hurt anyone or they don't want to offend anyone? You know, they want to attend the meeting, but you know, what if I say the wrong thing? How do you walk alongside people, and how do you kind of share with them a level of grace that can happen when having discussions around race and reconciliation? I'm gonna be like class. I'm gonna just pick somebody. Okay, come on, Pastor Armour, help us. How do we walk people through some of the fears of racial reconciliation?
I think it's going to take a lot of bowls of Wheaties, exercise, push-ups, and a lot of meditation, because it is a very tough conversation that's been echoed and redressed on today. And just the first step after that prerequisite work is done to really understand that I'm going into a space that it has to be determined as a safe space to kind of conversate. Because it is a palm sweating, as Jason said, conversation on both sides. I have a friend who just published a book. Her name is Janelle Massey. It's called The Miseducation of Empathy. She plays off of the hip hop album, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill by Lauryn Hill. That was a big blockbuster hit back in the 90s. Because to actually listen and to learn how to listen are two different perspectives. In those race conversations that we've all had during this season, active listening has to be out the door. It really has to be empathetic listening. And I thought that the first question I looked at was groundbreaking, because when it comes to the word empathy, it really has been the word that has been in solitary confinement. It's been locked up. We have to release empathy, because sympathy is feeling bad for you, but empathy is feeling with you. And many of these conversations that I'm having when it comes to white and Black, it almost seems impossible for another race to even be empathetic, because it's a non-relation to the situation that happened. When it comes to slavery or police brutality, if that hasn't happened to you or someone in your family of your race, it's hard to connect. So being empathetic and empathetic listening, to me, in my perspective, is trying to find that thought, or not even that experience, but that feeling where you can relate to being in pain, being held down, being discriminated with. Because me trying to walk in Dan's shoes is probably going to be impossible, but can I listen empathetically to find some feeling or emotion? It may not be the same experience, but it can kind of be the same feeling. And finding that, being able to repeat that in empathetic conversations. So we don't have the same situation, but I really know how you feel, because something like that happened to me on another different level. And so where one side is trying to solve the problem and trying so hard to feel, and another person wants to make you feel, I don't know how much ground we can cover. So empathetic listening. There's a book by Bob Bodine that's called Two Chairs. And I discovered that over the COVID season, and it's just a concept of waking up in the morning and sitting in a chair. You sit in a chair, you got an empty chair in front of you, and it's like you're having this dialogue with God, just two chairs. I got to do it early in the morning when everybody's sleeping and it's still dark outside. The Bible says that Jesus he was still away when they were still sleeping. And so it just, I think about that when I'm considering empathetic conversations and being empathetic. Can we talk without me solving the information, without me solving the problem, but just trying to hear what I can relate to when it comes to race relations, letting that be the catalyst or the foundation, and seeing how that turns out. And I think that we will misfire if we're not empathetic. It is the term that is, and I'm glad you brought it up, Janiqua. It is a witness protection program. We really have to bring that word out and be more empathetic in these sensitive conversations. So if we can start with that, and just really have empathetic listening for one another and to one another, I think that will be where we can most relate when it comes to race relations. That has to be the groundwork and the foundation. And then I think we can spring from there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Janiqua, I'm gonna thank you, Jermaine, for that. I agree completely. I just thought I might add something as Jermaine was talking. I know your question was how do you help people into this difficult space and shepherd them through that. And I don't have any magic solutions for that. It's just hard. It's just really hard. Like Jermaine said, you eat some Wheaties and some spiritual Wheaties and some push-ups. But I found myself also thinking theologically that in our tradition, and I think all traditions in the Christian church emphasize this to some extent, that it begins with grace. And so we don't we stress this, especially in Reformed tradition, that we don't repent or clean up and then the grace comes. It's the other way around. The grace comes unbidden. It comes just gratuitously from God, and that opens our eyes and enables us to see things that we would not have seen otherwise. And then we go and repent as a response to the grace. And the reason that might be significant in this discussion is that when I think about my context and the role of empathy in it, I think like a lot of pastors, I'm feel myself as somewhere to the left of a lot of the people that I serve in a political, social, theological way. And so I've got to first discover some empathy, which can be hard, for folks who are resistant to the change that I'm convinced and to the reconciliation that needs to happen. I've got to discover within myself some empathy for those folks who are upset about, say, Black Lives Matter, what they think it means. And I appreciate what Dr. Henry said. It doesn't mean necessarily what you think it means, but that's what folks have in their mind. So as I try to discover some empathy for them and try to meet them where they are and lead them into a more vulnerable space, I think somehow I have to convince them, and this becomes my preaching task, that they remain beloved children of God, unconditionally loved by God, and that no difficult conversation we have in this space, this difficult space we're going to walk into, is going to be able to take that away from them. And I know that sounds like the simplest thing in the world, but I if I can try to diagnose what my white brethren and sisterin who are having trouble with all this it's that will I only emerge as the villain in this discussion just because of who I am and because of the privilege I was born into and because of what my parents and grandparents and great grandparents did. It is so hard to walk into a space where you feel your only role to play is as the villain. And so, I mean, injustice is what it is. We don't apologize for that, for calling a truth. But if I can somehow get our folks to see that on the far side of this truth telling is redemption for them too, because everybody's better off when the truth is told and grace has its way in the world and lives and people and relationships and countries are transformed. Everybody is better off. And so I that's a lot of words for a very difficult thing, but that's how I experience it in my place, that I have to give them some confidence that they will not be destroyed by this conversation. It may be difficult. They may be asked to look at some difficult things, They will be asked to take responsibility, not that they didn't ever own any slaves, but that's not the point. We need to talk about what our country is and what it was built on, and that's going to be difficult. But at the end of the day, you, white person, will still be a beloved child of God, and that's not going to be taken away from you. You're just going to be called to some repentance, which is good. It's a good thing, not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Dan, you mentioned, excuse me, Janik, if I could jump in.
No, go ahead.
The power word of grace and love, it goes back to those Christian principles, right? That we have to come into this conversation with. It really is going to hinge on how we show up. I mean, you're going to have an open heart. I mean, what you said was beautiful about what we're still going to be in Christ on both sides of the conversation, because when we all know that is a very deep conversation, and I'm probably pushing Janika a little bit, but I know one of the questions deal with trauma, and how that's a layer too that you have to deal with before we think about what happened, why it happened, who did it, I'm sorry, the trauma of it all. And we're all preachers on this line. All six of us are preachers. Janika's a preacher too. And so we all are familiar with the story of the woman who was bent over, right? And you know, we commentaries will say that, you know, Jesus never touches evil spirits of demons, he calls them out. Well, he touched this one woman who was supposed to be bent over because of some evil spirit that hindered her 18 years ago. So the thought is 18 years ago, she was bent over by evil spirit and it left. So for 18 years, she is the result of what happened to her 18 years ago. That's trauma. You know, that's trauma. So she's been living more in trauma than she was when it first happened, right? And that's what we are living in. We're living in trauma of things that happened a long time ago. And so you have to go in with grace to deal with the trauma that a person is dealing with, which is more than just wounds or physical injury. It is a psychological injury that we have been carrying, or people carry, right? When we go in these conversations, it has to be grace. It has to be so much grace before we start talking about anything, to make sure that the room has the great temperature to have these very tough conversations about race. The Bible says, come, let us reason together. Isaiah chapter 1. I believe through reasoning with grace, with love, that we can get to the place where we want to be. But it's going to take that grace. That word grace just kind of shot out at me when you said it. I think that that's paramount in our conversations.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to take a sharp right turn.
Uh-oh.
To piggyback on what they just said, and honestly, I agree with both of them. But I think when we come to the table with an understanding that we are getting ready to talk about some things that are going to make us feel uncomfortable, but let's agree before we have this conversation that there are certain norms, certain things that we are not going to allow to happen in our meeting, just like we're doing today. We're going to respect each other. And when we come to the table with that attitude, it makes things better. The problem is, if we continue to shy away from having the conversations, we're never going to solve any of the issues. And I'm afraid that oftentimes, for the sake of feelings, for the sake of not hurting someone or saying the wrong thing, we just hold back. We don't have the conversation, and we go, we come back to the table and we have the same issues. You know, I've been part of these diversity teams and meetings, asked to be on them for 30 plus years. And at one time I stopped, and I'm going to be brutally honest. I said, I'm tired of talking and not seeing any action.
Yeah.
Because, you know, just to meet, and oftentimes it was funded by a grant. That's no good. Okay, let's have the conversation. The temperature, Pastor Armour, may get up. It may rise to the peak. But as Christians, as brothers and sisters in the ministry, let's agree that even though things may not turn out the way we want them to turn out, let's agree that we're going to resolve some issues, get up from the table and go out and be an agent of change.
Yeah.
So Reverend Terry, do you think in that, and thank you for that commentary and redress, do you think—
Please just call me Terry. Please just call me Terry.
Oh, okay, Terry. So do you think that in those conversations, can we come to the table with, and I pray we don't have a level of disrespect in the room, but if if we're talking to someone and they're kind of expressing, someone over here may be crying, someone may get loud, and we can leave there and say, oh, that person got angry or emotional. Is that okay in that space?
No, no, sir. No,
That's
sir.
not
That is not.
okay.
We need to listen. We need to actually be attentive. We need to respond with empathy and come back, and let's see, can't we help that person? Let's create a positive energy in the room. No, we don't want anyone to leave upset or frustrated or whatever. But sometimes we got to leave, and leaving, it will allow us to go back and think about what was said.
Right.
Think about how we can change. Think about how we can make a difference. No, I never want to leave any setting where we have hurt someone or that kind of. That's not positive.
Right. No, but I'm talking more about in that room. If we create that space, now the person that's on the front line, the young millennial, that's the Black Lives Matter, is going to come with a whole different energy than
Yes.
Billy Evans at my church, who's in his 70s and lived through it, versus a person like me, who was born in the 70s, raised in the 80s, came up on hip hop, got a couple of degrees. So I may come in at it more intellectual. Those are three different conversations you're going to have, right? And those emotions may start up. I'm saying within that setting, is it okay if those emotions rise up and we kind of just listen?
Can I jump in here?
Okay, I got you. Okay.
I want to jump in a little bit. So when here at the YWCA, one of the roles that I play, we facilitate trainings on diversity. One of the modules that we do, we teach about the ACEs and community resilience. And so we talk about the body's response to uncomfortability, to trauma, and what are the ways that you feel your body responding. And the higher your ACEs score is, the more likely you are to what a lot of mental health professionals call flipping your lid, which means you go off. So you may be in a room where somebody is yelling, screaming, pointing, crying, falling out. But I feel like our position as leaders is to, one, be able to notice what is actually happening. Two is to also teach people what their response is saying. So like when we were talking about the sweaty palms is one of the ways that the body is reacting when you may be about to flip your lid. And so when we go into these trainings, the first thing I do for the first 60 seconds, we close our eyes, we sit, and we regulate ourselves. Because you got to think, everybody's running into the room. Oh Lord, I'm about to be mad. Somebody about to say something. I can't help where I come from. They need to learn more about where they come from. You know what I mean? We know church people, right? And so we coming into this room, they already ready. Like, I'm ready for battle. I got my quotes, I got my scriptures, I got my articles, I got my stories. And what I say is stop.
Yeah.
Everybody just stop. And we're going to take 60 seconds and we're going to regulate our hearts. We're going to regulate our minds. We're going to regulate, our breathing. We're going to breathe and we're going to calm ourselves down. And I have found that also de-escalates the situation because people are already coming in with preconceived notions about what's going to happen when I get there. Somebody's going to look at me funny. Sister so-and-so not going to like my outfit. Well, I got on African dashiki and, people just have all of these things to say. But as leaders and as a facilitator, we stop and we regulate. And then we teach people, like, is your heart beating fast? Okay, well, we need to stop the conversation. Everybody, we're going to all take 60 seconds. We're going to close our eyes. We're going to breathe. We're going to regulate together. Because, again, historical trauma shows up in our bodies. It shows up in how we operate. Our daily lives, coming to work or going to the meeting or going to church and somebody flicks you off, or your lights get cut off, or, your husband decides to leave, or your wife decides to leave, or your child has called you, they're having another baby that they can't afford. Like, people come to the table with all of these things. And by the time they get to us when we're having these conversations, the first thing I say we should do is to help people regulate their breathing, their minds, so that when we do respond, we aren't always responding out of trauma.
Absolutely.
Janiqua, thank you for saying that. I'd like to maybe ask a question, maybe following up on some things that Terry said, and on the whole thing. So we're talking a lot about how you manage the room if you get people in the room having a difficult conversation, or how you manage the table if you get them to the table. my question is, I've sort of wondered about this because I keyed in on something that that Terry said about the fatigue of, man, I'm tired. I'm tired of having those conversations. I tell you, I have noted that in a big way, and probably Jermaine can attest to this, and maybe Janiqua and Sean too, and my friend Clifford Barnett in town, that they've all kind of gotten calls from me like, hey, what about this? Hey, about that? Hey, and they've told me, I know Reverend Barnett has told me this, and I bet Jermaine would feel the same way. The call to come and participate, Pastor, in another group where we're going to bring people together, and I've heard folks say, gosh, I'm tired of that. And I'll tell you honestly that I've been here 4 years. I've had trouble building the lasting partnerships to even get in the room to have those sort of conversations. That ministers group that Jermaine referenced is full. It's
trying to get you in. I'm trying to get you in.
Man,
too.
get me a bid. I'm waiting for my bid.
He get him in, Pastor Armour. Slide him in. Add another pastor to it. Help Pastor Dan out.
to be honest, and I'm not going to ask Jermaine to speak on behalf of a particular group, but that is probably illustrative of the fact that I mean, I'll just take a guess. They may not need another white guy in that group. We're good. We got our, and seriously, I would guess to you, this is especially to you, Terry and Jermaine, how many white churches you feel out there reaching out to you to say, hey, would you come and do this? I feel like y'all get a lot of that. And in my position, I don't want to be just another voice giving you another thing on your calendar. Almost feels like, hey, come teach us about race, is what we should already learn. And so it's hard to figure out how to get in the room to begin with. So maybe my question is, what venues and what ways do these conversations happen helpfully? Do we need to be having new venues, new relationships in new ways? Or do we just kind of double down on making those relationships and work harder to do it?
Pastor Dan, I like what you said at the end. I could really just be authentic, and I could double down on them. I was part of a group, Eric remembers some years ago. I hate to call names, but that's the way I remember the group. Mike Queen, Eric, if you remember, there were about 6 of us, and we decided to meet the late Bishop Utley. We were all part of that. We were going along, and I think we were doing good. And Eric, you remember, I pulled out. I pulled out because I thought that we were just saying what everyone wanted to hear. I'm old enough now that I want you to tell me the truth. I want you to genuinely tell me how you feel so that we can move past that. Quoting scripture is fine. That's fine. But let's talk about living the scriptures and moving forward with that. So I pulled out of the group, and afterwards, several of the guys came back and said, man, why did you pull out? And I was honest, and I told them, look, guys, I think we're just coming together saying what we expect someone else to say, or saying what we think, someone wants to hear. That's not being genuine. Let's come together. Let's talk about the fact that though we are different, our worship services are different, we do things differently, but yet we respect and honor each other as men and women of God.
Yeah, I think, and Terry said it perfectly. For me, let's say post George Floyd, the conversations that I had on race was just with my Black preachers when it came to race. I think that was pre-George Floyd. After George Floyd and the whole world saw what happened, the conversations began to cross-pollinate. It was more than just how we worship different. It was more how we seem to be different, but then trying to find how we are the same. And so those conversations, I began to have them with Dan. I began to have them with Paul from Hope Community or Faith Community, began to have them with Ethan at the Bridge. we begin to have serious race dialogue after George Floyd, when before I'm just talking with my boys from college. We on the phone just talking. So I think it always seems to be in our humanity, something has to happen to get our attention. And then we kind of jump into those conversations. But then again, I believe, Dan, to your point, and Terry said it, great, original. It has to be organic. I don't want to force group now that we have to talk now because this happened. I think that in the spirit of what we're going, doors will open up and people can be a part of conversations. I'd rather have an authentic conversation. I don't want you to meet your Black quota or me to meet my white quota. You know, I got 3 white fans this month. That's good. And the no quota, you know, if I never do, then let it be organic. And when it comes organic, it's more natural. And some of these conversations have been organic because of what has happened. The one thing that it didn't bother me, but it was amazing to me because I don't get fatigued from these conversations, and we've had a lot of them. I actually enjoy talking to my white brothers and sisters who really just seem to have these unbiased opinions of they really didn't know. Sometimes I close my Zoom and be like, well, how you didn't know that? But it is really, right. They genuinely didn't know. Yeah. And then you got those radicals that know and don't care, and I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do. But I've talked to a lot of brothers and sisters who are of the white persuasion that really didn't know. And the education of it is something that I love to tell of why we do. I was on a Zoom with one white church, and some of the members are very upset about the protests after George Floyd. I came across an article that a guy wrote in Paris about the psychology of a protest. And so to be able to share, you're upset about the protest, or why they tearing up stuff, but there's a reason why. You seen people coming out of that area with the George Floyd protests carrying flat screen TVs. Them folk didn't need no flat screen TVs. That's not why they did it. I'm able to get something and can't nobody do nothing to me, because on a regular day, I'm gonna get arrested for this. But the feeling of freedom that I can go into this store and take anything I want, it is not something that they need. It is going back to having something that I can get where no one can take from me, and I can break the law and can't nobody do nothing. That becomes the psychology of a protest. Not that they wake up and I'm gonna tear this whole city down. It's bigger than that. But if they're not educated on, there is a psychology and a reason why people protest, not just really to, tear up stuff. So that becomes education that I'm so happy to give. So then a person can say, oh, okay, I understand it now. Even though it's wrong and I'm against it, I can see why you did it. So having those kind of conversations was very enlightening to me when I talk to my white brothers and sisters about just really not knowing what's going on, and the invitation for them to come and want to hear, I think, as Terry said, is a step in the right direction. We got to keep having these conversations. But yeah, we want to see some results of these conversations as well.
Yeah, we definitely.
That'll be my commentary to that.
Go ahead, Pastor Eric.
Jermaine, I wanted to jump to really speak to what you're saying in terms of that awareness of, oh, wow, they didn't know. My white brothers and sisters just didn't know. And what I want to point out to that, and it goes back to what you said, Dan, about grace. It amazes me within the church, within the context of our shared faith in Jesus, the grace and the patience that not only is offered, but is almost is essential to the process of African-American followers of Jesus having that sense of patience and empathy with white followers of Jesus, because of the cluelessness of many of us of the white persuasion that is a function of white privilege. White privilege means you don't have to know all of the struggles that African-American sisters and brothers face on a daily basis. And so Terry, from the grace that I received so often from Macedonia members and so many others, there was a patience of, hey, it's almost like this intuitive sense, I think, in the African-American church community of this white brother, this white sister needs my help in understanding this, so that they can be empathetic and so that they can participate. So I think that's a huge part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think racism is like the coronavirus. I mean, it's still out there. Even though we ain't talking about it and CNN is not putting a ticker up of how many people died, it's still out there, right? And you know, some of the conversations have died down or softened, but it's still out there and it's been here. And me and Tanya in our Black household with our 2 children went through my daughter hugging my neck every time I came in after George Floyd and saying, "You made it home." You know, that's how much it affected her. And just until on Sunday, I'm outside and it's dark and they're popping firecrackers everywhere. And I see a whole bunch of young white kids just riding their bike down the street and up and down the street. And here comes my son with his bike. And I was like, "Well, why are you coming home so early?" Because he just left. He said, "Well, Mom told me to come home because she didn't want me riding my bike in the dark." So I know that is what's happening in our society. You know, we don't want our little Black boy riding his bike in the dark because of what's happening in our society. So it's out there. I mean, it's still out there and it's still in our mind that you're a young Black male. Yeah, let's bring it on in. I mean, we used to come in when the street lights was on in New York. I mean, everybody grew up with that. All right. But her reasoning was not because the street lights is on. I don't feel safe for him out by himself riding a bike at dark at nighttime. And I'm like, well, these other kids are riding. She's like, no, he need to come in. So it's still there. It's still there. And we have to be cautious of it. So yeah, I just want to throw that in. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it.
And two things I know, I think I see Velva commenting. She put the YWCA exclamation point. One of the things that I think is important is not always to lay the burden of racism at the feet of leaders, at the feet of pastors, and at the feet of churches. It is not the Black church's work to reconcile the church. It is not white churches' only work to reconcile. There are nonprofit organizations who are in your community that do the work. There is a Racial Justice and Equity Institute in the community that is doing the work. So for people who are inquisitive, if you want to know more, you don't necessarily always have to try to reach out to other churches or Black people that you may know. Reach out to people who are educated enough that are doing the work. And the YWCA is one of those organizations that is doing the work. The other thing I would love to do is mention 2 really good books. White Fragility is an amazing book. I'm reading it alongside of some people, a mixed group of women, and a lot of the white women have been like, this has been a very hard read for me, but it's been good and transformative. The other book I would say is Black Fatigue, because Black people are tired of having the conversation. We are wore out. We have been fighting since day one for equity, for justice, to be able to ride our bicycles, to be able to eat in restaurants. I talked to a friend's mom the other day, and she was like, my grandfather was a slave. Mm-hmm. I said, huh? She said, yeah, my big pa was a slave and he walked with a limp because he escaped with the shackles still on his leg. And so when we think about that story, slavery was not that far ago. If I can talk to someone who could say my grandparent was a slave, my grandparents personally were sharecroppers. So when we think about these stories and when we think about how do we progress forward, a lot of times people, when we're having these reconciliation conversations, we want to move forward so quick, but we have to stop and take a minute and think about our history and how it has impacted us. So Black Fatigue is one of those books that I would highly recommend if people want to understand the trauma that it takes on a Black person's body when they're doing race and reconciliation work.
So may I give a shout out to the YWCA?
Oh, thank you.
Brother, would you join me in giving a shout out to the YWCA and their awesome leader?
Awesome.
Thank you. We really, really appreciate it. And that is the end of our time. We thank you so much for watching Talk on Race to Reconcile. And we really hope that you were inspired, that you heard the vulnerability of these men on this panel, and that as you are maybe looking for churches, these are a great group of churches you may go to. And gentlemen, if you will stay on, but I am going to end our live. Thank you so much.